So the unemployment numbers are in right now, and holy cow, they are utterly devastating. But you have nothing to worry about because Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin said they're not relevant. Why? That's because the federal government is cutting you a check in 3 weeks for about $1,000. That's absolutely freaking insane. And there's a lot of little aspects to this that we're going to be discussing with, of course, Tim Picciott, the Liberty Advisor. That's going to be very important to take away from the larger context of the extreme measures that are being taken right now. And there's a lot to get into, but Donald Trump just moments ago tweeted 96-0. The United States Senate, congratulations, America. This is, of course, with the U.S. Senate voting and approving the $2 trillion stimulus package that, of course, will be sending you a little bit of that money to you. Meanwhile, Wall Street is robbing us blind, but shh, don't tell anyone. Shh, Steve Mnuchin, former Goldman Sachs, who's giving out all the slush funds, giving out all the money without any transparency, without even record keeping of him. Yeah, shh. That doesn't matter. And there's a lot of things in the bill that I specifically want to discuss. The bill just came out. There's people still reading it. There's a pay raise to the representatives of the government. There's money to the Kennedy Center. There's a lot of other things that we should be getting into to exactly what's in this stimulus package. But the bigger news economically today, Tim, is, of course, the jobless numbers soaring past 3 million people. Those are record high numbers, to be exact. 3,283,000 is the total number of people who are unemployed. And if you look at the charts of the historic levels of this, you see the charts from the 1970s being normal, the 1980s being normal, 1990s normal, 2000s, 2010s, and then 2020, just this huge wall to where it is right now. And Tim, this is only going to get worse from here, as these are just the initial numbers, with many people and businesses still holding on. But seeing how things are going, I see these numbers increasing. What's your take? Do you see these numbers increasing or decreasing, Tim?
Oh, man, they're going to massively increase next month. Because just remember, as you were just pointing out, that most of this data that's coming out is just from, obviously it's going to be the, March or February data, whereas next month is going to, I expect a lot of the layoffs to occur. So, I think April is going to be a complete bloodbath of a number because, there are some responsible businesses out there. They have extra cash on hand. Maybe they don't need to lay everybody off immediately. But now it's been a couple weeks and a lot of people have been shut down by the government. And I do have great empathy for all of them. I was effectively shut out for 8 months because I wanted to give a talk at Acapulco 3 years ago on how people could sell Bitcoin. And then also my broker-dealer didn't like the fact that I was doing certain media stuff and YouTubes and podcasts. And the state government put me essentially out of business, wouldn't give me a fingerprint card to work. And that was government rules and regulations, had a perfect record. And so my heart goes out to all these people because I know exactly how it feels, and it absolutely sucks. Now, when it comes to the unemployment numbers, and we had mentioned that Mnuchin had gone on and said that, these numbers don't really even matter. And to some extent, he's actually right. These numbers don't really matter because they're all BS, phony, made up numbers. And then, so this is part of the presentation I gave just last year at Acapulco. Take a look. So in this blue line over here is a number from Shadow Stats, which is actually how the government used to calculate these numbers. And then what we see is the official what they call headline number, which is that 3 million number that we read. That's going to be there in the red. Now this is old because this was from the presentation I gave in February. But even there's other broader definitions of unemployment, but they've been gamed and they've been switched throughout the years. So that way they're really not representative of what's going on. And you know who else knows they're not representative of what's going on? Donald Trump. Again, I was a huge Trump fan initially, but then take a look at what he was saying in 2012. Not a real recovery. These are phony numbers. Again, in 2012, these are complete frauds. 2014, phony number. Don't believe the 5.6. Don't believe it. It's probably 40% if you think about it. Oh, it's 42%, believe it or not. So false. This number is not reflective. Probably 32%. Nobody has jobs. It's not a real economy. It's phony numbers. Look again, you hear these phony numbers. It's as high as 35%. Oh, wait, it might be 42%. Phony numbers. And this is my favorite one. You hear a 5% unemployment rate. It's such a phony number. That number was put in for presidents, for politicians, so that way they look good to the people. 5% number is phony. 5% is one of the biggest hoaxes in American modern politics. totally fiction. And then, he goes on talking about all these different unemployment rate numbers. And that was part of the presentation. And I would recommend you guys actually, watch that entire presentation, because that was just obviously just a little snippet of it. But if we go back to, I'm trying to find where I had shadow stats up here on the screen.
Before we get into that, I kind of also want to highlight this kind of bigger battle that's been happening between Donald Trump and the Fed, which has been very fascinating to kind of see, because it's definitely a big game, but it's definitely a very interesting game unfolding between these two kind of institutions. But right now, the kind of war of words kind of escalated, with the Fed chairman, Jerome Powell, recently coming out and saying that the sickness will be the one that will dictate the reopening of the economy, and not Donald Trump. Of course, shrugging off criticisms from Donald Trump, that of course is putting a lot of blame on the Federal Reserve as well on here. So it's interesting to see these two kind of clashes come to head. I was wondering, what's your kind of thoughts and analysis on that? Because a lot of people are putting their hopes, putting their eggs in that one basket, that Donald Trump will reopen the economy no matter what. And I wouldn't hold my breath on that one, to be quite honest with you, Tim.
Yeah, I wouldn't hold my breath on that one either, and I'm actually pretty good at holding my breath. So what we've got over here is we're not writing blank checks. Jerome Powell claims nothing fundamentally wrong with the economy, and then they go on to say what you were reiterating about how we're going to be open for business soon. However, people are being asked to close their businesses and stay home from work. At a certain point, we will get the spread of the virus under control, and confidence will return. I mean, everything that we do is a confidence game, and so basically they are trying to say that this, what is going on with the virus, will dictate everything. And I think that this is sort of that they really have tried to hype certain aspects of this, and the hyping, I think, has made everything even worse off. Whereas why do they stress that people shouldn't be prepared ahead of time? I mean, everything the government does just helps exacerbate these problems. But a lot of people were coming out and saying, hey Tim, you must be ecstatic that Trump is talking about bad mouthing the Federal Reserve. Well, unfortunately, he's bad mouthing them for all the wrong reasons. I know this isn't blown up huge. Again, this was also from the presentation that I gave, and this is from 2016. What Trump was saying, he goes, they are not raising them, talking about the rates, because Obama has asked them not to raise them. Trump said, echoing similar comments he made in interviews last month. He wants to get out of office, talking about Obama, because we're in a bubble, and when those rates are raised, a lot of bad things are going to happen. I mean, he was absolutely right about that. He added, Janet Yellen is highly political, and she's not raising rates for a very specific reason, because Obama told her not to. He wants to be out playing golf in a year from now, and he wants to be doing other things. He doesn't want to see a big bubble burst during his administration. And unfortunately, and then I go on to talk about all these different black swans that are out in the economy and what you can do to protect yourself. And one of the things that you can do is you guys can get my book that actually talks about how they rig the inflation rate, how they rig the unemployment data and GDP. But actually, if you text "change the news," one word, no spaces, to 71441, we'll get you hooked up on that. But yeah, getting back to the unemployment numbers, these are fake, phony numbers that have been switched all throughout history. So I mean, there's been they used to calculate it differently in the 80s versus 90s versus how they calculate it now. And so this number, when you want to compare it to what's going on today versus what used to happen, completely different set of news. And if you actually go ahead and read that book, the entire book is actually, it's only like 17 pages, is lambasting Obama. The entire thing is about Obama. And now you go and read it, and it's basically just as true for everything Trump is doing as what Obama was doing. And so that's been my biggest criticism. But yeah, with these unemployment numbers, it's going to get way worse next month, in my opinion. I mean, because this is always a lagging indicator. So, as businesses are, they don't want to, the last thing they want to do is have to let people go, because it's very hard to have to train new people to, if things do end up ramping back up, which I don't think they're going to, immediately, it's going to be very hard. But then unemployment, pretends to other things. So, we were, talking about how, Jerome Powell said that, nothing is fundamentally wrong with the economy. I mean, if you watch my presentation, he can go see everything that's wrong with the economy. But then this also leads to other propaganda, because it's all a confidence game. And so, the last video we did, we talked about how this was the end of capitalism. Well, right now, part of capitalism does not have an FDIC. There should be private insurance. The FDIC is a complete joke. That's the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. Doesn't work like true insurance. There's not the true risks that are actually in there right now. And if there was it's sort of like Luke and I trying to backstop Bill Gates. So, there's no way that we're going to go be able to, we can maybe cover, 1 second of his spending. But, and this is sort of the analogy I want to use, is that you got trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars in the system. And I don't know the number off my head, but it's like the FDIC has like 40 billion. I mean, enough to, for like a hiccup in the entire system, but they're just going to print money. And so I think they won't take your money, but they'll take it through inflation, which is even more of an insidious tax because it's hidden. And so people don't realize that they're being taxed if they can tax things through inflation. But if you want, I want to go through and actually play like 10 or 20 seconds of this clip, because it's all, this pure propaganda of what you'd expect from everybody over at the FDIC.
This is what I would like you to take away from this. Your money is safe at the banks. The last thing you should be doing is pulling your money out of the banks now, thinking that it's going to be safer someplace else. You don't want to be walking around with large wads of cash, and you sort of
you could have coronavirus on that cash. So I mean, you don't want to be walking around with any cash, Luke. And you just see all the propaganda that's going into this. But something that's not propaganda that I 100% believe is Trump says suicides. And this is from the SHTF. Plan.com with Mark Salvo. Trump, suicides from the coming economic depression will far surpass those from the virus. I am actually, unfortunately, 100% agree with him. The 2008 Great Recession resulted in more than 10,000 suicides. If the economy is closed for business much longer, that number could be dwarfed by the number of people who could no longer survive without a livelihood. People get tremendous anxiety and depression, and you have suicide over things like this. When you have a terrible economy, you have death, President Donald Trump said. And this would definitely be in far greater numbers than we're talking about in regards to the virus. And then goes on to say, this was a medical problem. We're not going to let it turn into a long-lasting financial problem, he added, urging Congress to pass the $2 trillion stimulus bill urgently and without partisan politicking, as workers and employees across the U.S. were hurting from lockdowns and quarantines. Although this is already a financial problem for many, as many of the businesses that closed during the lockdown will never reopen, their owners and employees losing their livelihoods for the foreseeable future. That's hardly a solution. The U.S. economy was not meant to be shut down. The longer it is, the greater impact it has.
Yeah, I mean, the whole market is based on confidence of people using and believing in it. And when we look at the projections of what's ahead, doesn't look too good at all. Just to reiterate my position, we have a lot of people on the left saying we got to give all the money to the people. We got a lot of people on the right saying we got to give all the money to the corporations. And in reality, just like the post I just made on my Twitter account, could we just not steal from people? Like we're printing money anyway. I've been saying this for weeks. We're printing money out of thin air, giving it to a lot of special interests. Now we just gave a little bit to the people, gave them a little of the chicken straps compared to what we're giving to Wall Street. I mean, when we look at what's been happening historically, specifically with the Great Depression, which we did a whole video on comparing what happened during the Great Depression to what's happening now. It's not just one event that leads to kind of the major calamities, but a series of events. And it wasn't just the stock market crash that led to the Great Depression. It was also large unemployment numbers. Now, very interestingly, we have very large unemployment numbers, but also we have the stock and the Dow going up for the third day in a row. This, of course, is after the news of this $2 trillion and, of course, some hope, some optimism, and a lot of people thinking that, Trump's going to reopen the economy. I see this I see this as a temp solution. I kind of see this as a Band-Aid compared to having one of your limbs severed. That's how I see it. Am I correct to say that, Tim? And let's close it off here.
Yeah, and actually that was, I was sort of using an analogy like that before where I'm like, Trump inherited an economy where, technically it's like a patient that has every, limb severed off, bleeding out. And then, we want to then, be talking about, and then with, an 800-pound gorilla on top of us. Maybe we got some of the gorilla off of us, but we're still bleeding out. And it's a bad situation. And we do see stocks, rocketing higher right now. But if you take a look at what days have the highest up days ever, they were in like 1929, 1932, 2008, 2009. From last week, from a couple of days ago. Those are always the times when you have the biggest up markets. And again, if you guys text "change the news" to the number 71441, you get my book called "How It's Rigged: The Economy," where it just goes through how they rig all these different numbers on the inflation rate, the unemployment data, and the GDP. And it was originally meant to dispel everything against Obama. The same thing could be used, unfortunately, for Trump. And it pains me to say this. I was rooting for him. I had hope in him. I believed when he said that the Federal Reserve, there was an end the Fed vote, I believe, in 2016, and Ted Cruz missed that vote. And there's a tweet by Trump where he said, it's so important. I can't believe Ted Cruz missed his vote. And then he's criticizing, Hillary and Obama and Janet Yellen. And then he gets in there and then criticizes them for not doing the same things that they were doing for Obama. And so, unfortunately, I didn't change. He changed. And at this point, we've got to change the news. And it's just, the more people that know how this game is rigged, then we can actually stop this stuff. But we're in the end games. And so it's more important that you guys share this information, get it out, make sure others know this information, because, we've got a lot of bad times ahead of us. But it doesn't have to be that way. And the only way that it can change if you guys are part of that change.
Stay tuned for more.